Have you ever wondered why you always end up in the same kind of relationships? Not just once, but over and over again, being treated as an option, not a priority. Or on the other hand, you build walls so strong that no one can ever get close enough. You call it personality, incompatibility, or bad luck in love. But what if none of that is random? What if the answer doesn't lie in the people you've met, but in the first man you ever knew? The one who silently shaped how you love, how you trust, and even what you believe you deserve. In this video, we're going to unpack a truth many people avoid: the profound impact of an absent father on how a woman enters and maintains relationships. If you've ever seen yourself in these emotional patterns, stay until the end, because what comes next might change the way you look at your entire past. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss content that helps you understand yourself better. But what makes all of this so hard to recognize is the way it operates silently. There's no loud explosion, no single memory you can point to and say, this is when everything changed. Instead, it's more like an undercurrent, slow, continuous, and subtle enough to seep into how you feel about yourself without you even realizing it. A girl who grows up without emotional connection from her father doesn't necessarily think, my father hurt me. Instead, her young mind interprets it in a more personal, deeper way. Maybe I'm not important enough to be heard. Maybe I have to try harder to be loved. And that invisible belief, unspoken, unexamined, becomes the foundation for how she enters the world of relationships as an adult. When the first love appears, it's not just a new experience, it's a reactivation of what has felt familiar for a very long time. If attention in the past was inconsistent, if affection came and went without explanation, the nervous system encodes that as a norm. And then when she meets a man who is distant, unpredictable, or gives affection in small portions, a deep part of her feels familiar. Not because it's good, but because it resembles what she has known before. This is why many intelligent, strong, and self aware women can still be drawn into relationships that hurt them. Not because they don't know right from wrong, but because their bodies and emotions are seeking familiarity, not health. In psychology, this is often linked to attachment styles, where love is not just a feeling, but also a biological response. When someone grows up with inconsistency in affection, they may develop an anxious attachment style, always alert, always analyzing, always wondering whether they are about to lose that love. This explains why an unanswered message can create such a strong sense of anxiety, why a small change in tone can make the heart feel heavy. And over time, to reduce that anxiety, many people begin to adjust their behavior. They become more accommodating, more flexible, more willing to sacrifice, not because they are weak, but because they are trying to maintain the connection at all costs. But the paradox is, the more they try to be loved, the further they drift from the feeling of being naturally loved. At the other extreme, some women respond in the exact opposite way. Instead of clinging, they withdraw. Instead of seeking connection, they build near absolute independence. They learn not to need anyone, not to rely on anyone, and to keep emotional distance as a form of self-protection. From the outside, this can look like admirable strength, but deep inside, it often comes from the same wound: the fear that if they open up, they won't be met, or worse, they will be abandoned. Both of these responses, clinging and avoidance, though they look very different, actually share the same root. It is the absence of a core childhood experience, the feeling of being safely loved without having to prove anything. When that is missing, a girl grows up having to design her own way of coping with love. And those ways, while effective at protecting her from immediate pain, can unintentionally keep her trapped in old patterns as an adult. Another aspect that is often overlooked is how these experiences shape personal identity. When a child learns that attention and validation come from being appropriate, well behaved, or not a burden, they may learn to adjust themselves to meet others' expectations. Over time, this creates a mode of existence that many psychologists describe: living as a version of oneself that is designed to be accepted, rather than being one's authentic self. This explains why many women later feel like they don't really know who they are. They may be successful, liked, and able to function well in relationships, yet inside there remains a hard to name emptiness, a sense that some part of them has never been seen, never been allowed to fully exist. And when you are not truly connected to yourself, setting healthy boundaries in relationships becomes incredibly difficult. You may find yourself saying yes when inside you want to say no. You may accept behaviors you know are not right, just out of fear of losing the connection. Or you may constantly put others' needs above your own, hoping that will make you good enough to be loved. But real love is not built on silent self sacrifice. It is built on authentic presence, something many people were never taught from the beginning. And this is perhaps the most important part. Realizing that these patterns are not a life sentence. They are adaptations, ways your mind and body develop to survive in a certain environment. That means they can be understood, unraveled, and gradually changed. But the first step is always awareness. Not to blame the past, but to understand why the present is unfolding the way it is. Because when you begin to see the invisible threads that have been shaping how you love, you also begin to have the chance to cut them. And for the first time, you are no longer just reacting to love based on what is familiar, but choosing based on what is truly healthy, worthy, and aligned with who you are becoming. But there is one important thing that needs to be made clear, not to create fear, but to bring proper understanding. Findings about the connection between family environment and biological development are not a fixed sentence for anyone. They do not say that if you grew up without a father, you will definitely have problems. Instead, they point to something deeper. The human body and mind always adapt to the environment in which they are raised. And sometimes those adaptations continue to influence us long after the original circumstances have changed. Imagine the nervous system as an incredibly sensitive learning system. It doesn't just remember what happened, it also learns to predict what will happen next. When a girl grows up in an environment where emotional safety is unstable, sometimes present, sometimes absent, sometimes close, sometimes distant, her nervous system begins to adjust to cope with that uncertainty. It becomes more vigilant, more sensitive to even the smallest changes in other people's behavior. This can be very useful in the original environment, helping her read situations and protect herself. But when entering the world of adult relationships, that same sensitivity can become a constant source of stress. This is why many women feel like they can't fully relax in love. Even when everything seems fine, a part of them is still watching, analyzing, predicting. Not because they want to, but because their nervous system has been programmed to do so from a very early age. And when this state of vigilance lasts for a long time, it can affect the body as well, from sleep to energy levels to the way they respond to stress. Another aspect that is less often mentioned is how childhood experiences can influence how we perceive attraction, what we often call chemistry. That strong pull towards someone is not always simply positive compatibility. In many cases, it can be the nervous system's response to encountering a familiar pattern. Unpredictability, distance mixed with moments of intense attention, all of these can trigger a powerful feeling that we mistake for true love. But if you look deeper, you may notice something worth reflecting on. Healthy, stable, consistent relationships where you are truly respected and valued do not always create that same sense of drama. For someone who is used to uncertainty, stability at first can feel unfamiliar, even a bit boring. And this is the paradox. What is good for you may not immediately feel right, while what is familiar can pull you back into old patterns. That is precisely why the process of awareness becomes more important than ever. When you begin to understand that intense emotions are not always a sign of compatibility, you can gradually create space between automatic reactions and conscious choices. You start asking, is this really good for me? Instead of relying only on immediate feelings. And over time, those small choices begin to reshape how you experience love. Another important point to emphasize is this: healing does not mean denying the past, nor does it mean blaming anyone. In many cases, the father was simply acting within his own limitations and experiences. What matters is not determining who was right or wrong, but recognizing that the impact existed, so that you can actively change how it continues to affect your life. This process often begins with rebuilding the relationship with yourself, learning to listen to your emotions without judgment, learning to set boundaries without guilt, And most importantly, learning to believe that you deserve a kind of love that does not require you to trade away yourself. This is not a quick process. It requires time, patience, and sometimes support from outside sources such as therapy or safe communities. But there is a hopeful truth. The nervous system is not fixed. It has the ability to change, adapt, and relearn, a process that science calls neuroplasticity. This means that no matter what you have experienced in the past, you still have the capacity to build new, healthier experiences and gradually create an inner sense of safety that you may have never had before. And when that begins to happen, a subtle but powerful shift emerges. You are no longer drawn into relationships simply because they feel familiar. You begin to recognize the value of consistency, respect, and genuine presence. You no longer have to overexert yourself to keep someone around because you understand that the right kind of love will not require you to lose yourself. Ultimately, what all of this points to is not avoiding love, but experiencing it more fully. Not from the fear of abandonment, but from conscious choice. Not from lack, but from a sense of inner fullness. And perhaps that is the most important shift of all, from unconsciously repeating the past to consciously creating a different future. But there is an important shift that happens right at this point when you begin to realize that what you once thought was your personality may actually just be survival strategies formed very early on. And when you see them from that perspective, everything starts to change. You no longer look at yourself with judgment. Why am I so weak? Why do I keep repeating the same mistakes? But instead, with a deeper understanding, I learned this to survive, and now I can learn a different way to live better. This is the transition from unconsciousness to awareness. And although it may sound simple, in reality, it is a process that requires patience and honesty with yourself. Because when you start observing your patterns, you will realize that they don't only appear in major relationships, but also seep into the smallest details of everyday life. The way you react when someone doesn't reply to a message, the way you feel when you are misunderstood, the way you talk to yourself when you make a mistake. All of these are clues that reveal how your internal emotional system is operating. And this is where the concept of the inner father becomes especially important. Not as an abstract idea, but as a practical skill you can develop every day. It is the ability to give yourself what you may have lacked: stability, protection, and unconditional validation. When a difficult emotion arises, instead of immediately seeking reassurance from the outside, you begin to learn to pause and ask yourself, what do I truly need right now? It could be reassurance, it could be a clear boundary, or simply the acknowledgement that your feelings are valid. This process does not eliminate the need for connection with others. On the contrary, it makes those connections healthier. When you are no longer entirely dependent on others to feel worthy, you begin to enter relationships from a more balanced place. You no longer have to earn love by sacrificing yourself, nor do you need to avoid it to protect yourself. You can stay, observe, and choose instead of reacting automatically. An important part of this shift is learning to tolerate normalcy. This may sound strange, but for many people, stability at first does not feel exciting. There are no emotional highs, no uncertainty that makes the heart race, just consistency, clarity, and respect. And precisely because it is different from what you are used to, it may not immediately feel attractive. But if you allow yourself to stay long enough, you will begin to notice something deeper. Peace can also be a form of love. Alongside this, setting boundaries becomes an essential skill. Not about building walls to push others away, but about creating clear limits to protect your self-worth. This can start with very small things: saying no when you truly don't want to, expressing your feelings honestly, or leaving situations where you feel undervalued. Each time you do this, you are sending a new signal to your nervous system: I have the right to be respected. And over time, those small signals begin to accumulate into a larger shift. You no longer feel the need to prove that you are worthy. You are no longer drawn into relationships just because they trigger intense emotions. Instead, you begin to recognize the value of consistency, of genuine presence, and of people who do not make you question yourself. This does not mean the journey becomes perfect. There will be moments when you fall back into old reactions. There will be times when you feel triggered by familiar fears. But the difference now is that you recognize it more quickly. You are no longer stuck in the loop without understanding why. You can pause, breathe, and choose again. And that is the essence of healing, not erasing the past, but changing your relationship with it. What happened remains a part of your story, but it is no longer the author of the chapters that follow. You are the one holding the pen. Ultimately, the most important thing to remember is this: no single pattern fully defines who you are. What you have experienced may have shaped you, but it does not limit who you can become. When you begin to see those patterns, understand their origins, and gradually choose new responses, you are doing something very few people truly do. You are actively rewriting your own story. And perhaps that is the deepest form of freedom.